Good morning. Welcome to Dynasty Playbook, Dynasty FF's dedicated podcast. I'm your host, Drew, and with me is my two new co-hosts, Tyler and Scott. Tyler, where can we find you on Reddit?
I am user Barles.
And Scott, where are you at Reddit?
I am Stewie35.
And neither of you are on Twitter, so if you want to talk to these guys, you gotta find them on Reddit. As always, I'm on Reddit at EAF_Marine and on Twitter at DrewDotsonNFL. I'll talk to you on Twitter though. So,
Oh.
all right. As you've noticed, we've got a new cast. Like we talked about last week, Dave's gonna be working on the subreddit now. So, Scott's been with us before. Tyler's been, incredibly active member of the sub. I think I'm in roughly 100 leagues with him.
Somewhere in that range.
And he's just, one of the most knowledgeable guys that I talk to. Whenever I've got ideas I want to bounce off of him, off anybody, I go to him. So I figure why not bring in the most knowledgeable people we got? So I figure let's start off with little introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, and we'll get started. So Scott, let's let you go first.
All right. Well, I've been playing Dynasty for about 3 or 4 years now. I'm in 7 or 8 leagues now. Prefer IDP. Really enjoy playing. Love football. Big Broncos fan. And yeah, that's about it.
All right, and Tyler, go ahead.
I'm much the same as Scott. Been playing redraft for several years and really only got hardcore into Dynasty in the last 2 years or so. Also much prefer IDP. I'm also a huge Broncos fan. So Scott and I get along great.
Also, this isn't just one guy with a voice changer. Scott and Tyler are actually different people. If you watch the YouTube, you can tell they have different faces. But also, Scott and incredibly knowledgeable about IDP, so hopefully we'll be able to do more IDP coverage on the show going forward, because I know that was one area we were kind of severely lacking in. So let's go ahead and move forward. I know some of us wanted to cover coaching changes, so were there any new real coaching changes going on this week that we wanted to hit on?
Not any
Not
that I can think of. And I got you. No, really, for me, the big one is Rex and old boy at offensive coordinator up in Buffalo. I mean, looks like it has the potential to be a train wreck.
Yeah.
And I just don't get it. I don't get the Roman hiring. That one just really kind of put me on my heels. Not sure what to think about it.
It kind of fits Rex's idea of what he wants his offense to look like, though, because Roman's very much, a power run type of guy, and so is Rex. So, I mean, it matches his philosophy, but it doesn't really fit what the NFL is geared towards anymore. So that's why I can see it not making sense. Plus, Greg Roman's not all that good. But I can understand why it makes sense for Rex Ryan. The one I'm interested to see, because correct me if I'm wrong, but they still haven't. The Jets still haven't inked Chan Gailey to a deal, have they?
I don't believe so.
No. I mean, I'm hoping that goes through, because that kind of puts everybody on the Jets' arrow pointing up. People, there's this huge anti-Jets bias, and I think that gives you an incredible chance to buy low on these guys that you might like. Decker, Amaro, anybody that might go there in free agency. I'm not saying go buy Geno Smith. Um, I'm not going off the deep end here. Because remember, even Fitzpatrick didn't have a very high ceiling with Jan Gailey. But what do you guys think of Gailey with the Jets? Scott?
Honestly, I don't really know much about Chan Gailey. Obviously, he coached for Buffalo for a while. I just don't have a lot of feelings on him. I'm not a big Chan Gailey fan, just because I don't know as much as I wish I did. But I think it could help him out. That'll be all right. They need a lot more talent on that team before they're going to go very far anyway. So I think regardless, he's going to need a little bit of time to try and work with that roster to try and get them where they'd like to be.
That's fair. Anything to add, Tyler?
Not really. I mean, I think we pretty much hit it. I can't see it being a negative if they do actually get him inked. There is some talent to be had there in New York. I mean, obviously Percy is a stud when he's healthy and when they can get him the ball. And, Decker's proven that he can do good things. And, I love Amaro. Amaro's a beast. If they can find a way to get him in the slot and get him, 80, 90 targets a season, I think he can really produce there. So I'm kind of on board with you on, at least looking at some of the Jets players right now because, they can be had for almost nothing.
Absolutely. I think Amaro's the only one that's really going to cost you right now, and that's just because he's still relatively young, and people still have that hype off of him just coming out of college. But I think we can go ahead and, unless there's any other coaching situations you want to hit on, I think we can move on. All right. The next point we wanted to hit on was Deron Carter or Graydon Principal to sign with the Colts, which he can't do until, I think, March. But essentially, he's signing with the Colts. Tyler, you have any thoughts on any idea what this means for Deron Carter?
It's just so tough to say. I mean, he fizzled in college because of character issues. He obviously has the bloodlines, but not necessarily the pedigree. He's got the size. He produced well in the CFL. If anywhere, the Colts will be a good landing spot for him, but it's just hard to say right now. I mean, is he worth a speculative ad if you can get on the cheap, or if you're able to pick him up, if your waiver wire is open right now, or if you're able to get him, during blind bidding during the season? Yeah, he's definitely worth a roster spot, but I'm certainly not expecting too much, to say the least.
Yeah. Scott, are you expecting much out of him, or if you own him, are you selling him right now?
I don't know. I think that his value is really dependent just on what his last name is, so I'm not necessarily buying everything he's selling there. If he's cheap, I'm taking him, but I'm definitely not giving up even a second round. I don't even know if I'd give up a third round for him. It's just hard to bet on somebody that has so many question marks right now, and he is pretty young. I believe he's 23 still, so at least he's still got that going for him. He's kind of almost just like having a rookie. I worry about the character issues because we see what can happen to some players. So I think it's definitely something to be wary of. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm not spending a lot of money on him. I agree that if you can get him for cheap, blind bidding bet or something like that, I would definitely try and grab him and just have him on the roster as a stash. But I'm not grabbing him thinking he's going to be, the next big thing or anything.
I completely agree with both of you. If you can get him off your waiver wire, you can get him for 4th round pick, I'm all about it. But if his last name was Smith, no one would care. This guy was an undrafted free agent with the potential to be like a 4th round pick if he was an altar boy. I'm not really that worried about it. They're signing him to a contract that's got like $1,000 guaranteed or something like that. It's essentially an undrafted free agent contract. He might not even make the roster come opening day. So to invest any significant draft picking him seems kind of, I don't know. It seems like you're putting way too much faith in the kid. There's a lot of people who are, kind of putting this in the spin of what does this do for Moncrief's value? Does this make you worry about Moncrief's value in the least, either of you guys?
Go ahead,
go
Tyler.
ahead, Scott.
Oh, no, don't tell me. You go.
All right, I got it. I think, obviously it's going to put a little bit of concern out there, but Moncrief is the one with the pedigree. Moncrief's the one that they've spent draft capital on. Moncrief's got a year in the system, and he's obviously a physical freak. Could Carter cut into his work? Maybe, but I'm still buying Moncrief just the same as I was before. I don't think Carter has any positive or real negative impact on his situation.
I'd have to agree with that almost 100% there. I think that Carter is going to be kind of like Levon Brazil was for a year there. He's going to maybe get a lot of hype, but I don't know if anything's going to end up coming out of that. There's a lot of talent there, especially at wide receiver. They've been loading up there in Indianapolis, and I like what they're doing. I don't know if Carter, he could find a role, but I just don't know that he will. I think that Moncrief definitely won't be hurt by his value, and I think I'm still buying Moncrief. I already have him. I'm not selling him. I'm not thinking this is lowering his value at all. I'm definitely sitting where I am on Moncrief and not letting this freak me out at all.
Yep. Once again, I'm sitting in the same spot. Tyler, I like what you said. They spent the draft capital on Moncrief. It's been a third-round pick on him a year ago, and if somebody tried to make the comparison to me that them signing Carter was like picking up a third-round receiver, but it's really not, because they're not spending another third-round pick on a wide receiver. If they went in this next draft class and spent a third-round pick on a wide receiver, then I'd be concerned, because that tells me they have no faith in Moncrief. But if they're signing a guy to a contract that you would give an undrafted free agent, I don't care. For all we know, they could be signing Deron Carter to, be their next wide receiver 3, because they're losing Nix. They're probably losing Wayne. Who's going to be their wide receiver 3? Because they really got nobody to fill the slot. They're going to have to bring in somebody in free agency in the draft if Carter doesn't pan out. But if he does, he could very well be a solid wide receiver 3 for them. So he might have his own individual value without Moncrief getting hurt at all. But I think we've talked enough about him. I guess, it's the Super Bowl. I guess we should talk about that a little bit. But I don't feel like we should talk about it in terms of football, because who cares? What are your thoughts on it in terms of Dynasty? Are any of these players that are leaving, any of these players that could have potentially a big game that could up their contract going out? Somebody that could get a lot of hype going into the offseason even. Like, I don't know if Josh Boyce is going to be on the active roster for today, but I know he was for the AFC Championship game. If you got an open waiver wire, see if you can sneak Josh Boyce on your roster. Because if he has just this random big game, guess who's going to have all the hype in the world, because that was the last game people saw for the entire offseason, going into the whole offseason. Granted, I'm kind of a Boyce fanboy, because he's one of those metric marvels. But, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
I don't know if I can think of anybody offhand. I think any Patriots running back could end up getting a lot of hype. Those are always up and down, so people could end up, if they see one running back get 10 carries, 120 yards, like, this is the guy to own, and this is who they're going to play all next year. But, Belichick, you never know who that's going to be from week to week, let alone year to year. So, I don't know if there's anybody that you should trust as far as the hype just from the Super Bowl. I think it's still just any other game. I know it's, for the trophy and all, which is a big deal for them, but you can't take it like that when you're trying to figure out dynasty value. You can't say, oh, because it was a Super Bowl and he did good, he's going to be the greatest player ever or anything like that. So I think some people might get a little bit overhyped, but nothing that you should get too excited about. It's still just another Sunday there for them.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Scott on that. I mean, looking at the two teams, throw out Lynch, throw out Gronk, and the two quarterbacks, obviously, and what's left. There's not a whole lot to be said about the two rosters. I mean, Danny Amendola could catch 12 balls for $150 and 2 touches today. Is that going to move your needle? I'm not going to be running out to buy him. Same with the Pats running backs. I mean, I've been burned by Ridley. We've all been burned by Vereen. And not necessarily the players, but the structure. Who's going to get the touches? What is Belichick going to do week to week? So, I don't really think it matters what happens in today's games. Those rosters are pretty stagnant as far as their dynasty value, in my opinion, anyway.
That's an excellent point. And I like what you said, Scott, about not letting it, affect your value. And I think really the best way to look at it is let it affect other people's value. If somebody gets hot that shouldn't be getting hot, use it as your chance to sell high. But don't make yourself buy somebody high that you shouldn't be. If Jermaine Kearse has a huge game, don't go out and buy Jermaine Kearse for a bunch. And I'm a guy who likes Jermaine Kearse. But I like Jermaine Kearse at his price, not for the 201. But it is just another Sunday. But with it being the last game of the season, it's going to be the last thing in people's minds. Just like, everybody went into the last offseason with all these huge thoughts about No Sean Moreno, and look what happened.
Very true. Very true.
But Tyler, you brought up Marshawn Lynch. News came out this morning that there's a rumor that Marshawn Lynch got offered a huge new contract where he could potentially be making $10 million a year for the next couple of years.
Yeah,
what's your initial reaction?
They're going to double his 2015 salary is what it's supposed to do. That's ridiculous.
This will make him the highest paid running back in the league other than Adrian Peterson. And am I the only one that thinks this is just insane, or?
I think it's pretty crazy given the current market on running backs. The NFL right now, it's get them cheap, chew them up, spit them out, move on. Is Lynch worth the money? Is he a top-tier running back? Yeah, definitely. From a dynasty perspective, how many of us have been holding Christine Michael and or Robert Turbin for all these years just thinking, hey, Lynch is gone, Lynch is gone, Lynch is gone. I think we may have gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves as a dynasty community, because if Lynch inks, what's Michael worth now?
Not a lot, but I'll tell you, I think that increases Turbin's value if Lynch resigns, because I think that means Turbin leaves in free agency and he gets a chance to go he gets a chance to pull like a Michael Turner. But I think, like you said, the running back market's insane in how cheap it is. What the Cowboys just offered DeMarco Murray a couple weeks ago, what was it, $4 million a year? Granted, it was kind of like it was a bullshit offer just to say, hey, we offered him. But
he gave you something.
Right, but the fact that they're not even trying to hold on to a guy that just put up such ridiculous numbers kind of says something. I get that there's going to be a lot of negative PR if they don't bring back Lynch because he's one of the faces of the franchise, but $10 million a year is just bonkers to me.
DeMarco Murray's a free agent too. Why don't you just wait and try and offer both of them? I mean, shoot. I'd much rather have DeMarco for just over what Cowboys offered him than trying to go for Lynch for $10 million. I don't see the point in offering him so much. They should try and keep him. I think that they could probably convince him for a little bit less. I guess this is a power move from Pete Carroll there, trying to show that he's going to keep the guys that are doing good for him together, and he's trying to instill that we pay our own, and they've been saying that for the past year and a half now. And after the Percy Harvin thing, I wasn't sure if they were going to pay their own, and then they ended up trading him 3 weeks into the season or whatever that was. So I think he's trying to show that if you're going to play well for me, he's trying to keep all those guys motivated to keep playing well. Because there's already so many guys that are coming up and looking great on that team. So I think some people are probably getting a little bit worried, thinking that, well, maybe there's not going to be any money to go around. So I think he's just trying to show everybody that if you're playing the way he wants you to play, he's going to pay you, and maybe trying to get some more people excited about going to Seattle.
Yeah, and a thought just occurs to me. You know, the fact that they'd come out of the gate offering him $10 million, shows that there's some reason that Lynch isn't going to take $8 million, which is more than he's making right now. Which means he either wants to leave Seattle or they're trying to keep him from retiring. So maybe he's really kind of leaning towards retirement, and they're doing everything they can to keep him from doing it. Maybe he's getting sick of the league's policies. Maybe he's ready to go out on a high note.
Policies. You already know that. Showed up to 3 interviews basically just to say I'm only here so I don't get fined.
Yep.
I'd say that he's pretty over it, if that's a word there.
But Tyler, you got anything else to throw in on this, or?
Not really. I mean, I think we've pretty well covered it. I mean, it's kind of one of those situations. It just is what it is. But I think you may be onto something with that he may retire. We heard some grumbles about that. Excuse me. During the regular season, that Lynch was considering retirement. This may be a power move. Keep him in the league, keep him in a Seahawks uniform. If he's going to be anywhere, keep him there. Yeah.
And let's move on to our player discussions for the week. This is the first time we've had player discussions in a couple of weeks. Scott, I know you wanted to talk about Victor Cruz. I know that's a guy Tyler's fairly partial to. What do you got with Cruz?
My thing on Cruz is I think you should be trying to buy Cruz in most of your leagues. I think that a lot of people are really low on Cruz because they're so high on OBJ. I think OBJ is going to help open things up for Cruz, and I think that's going to make Cruz's value actually stay the same to where he was already. He's not going to get quite as many targets, I think, because OBJ is going to take so many of those from him. But I think that he's still going to have lots of room out there. I think that OBJ is going to help open up the field. If they can keep developing Larry Donnell over there, I think that Victor Cruz has a lot of bright future ahead of him. I don't know what his contract looks like, but Cruz is somebody I'm buying for what I feel is pretty cheap right now. I feel like people are undervaluing him just because of how much hype is going around OBJ, which is very rightfully so. He's going to be a great receiver, so I see it. But that doesn't mean that the rest of them need to fall off to the side. So I'm definitely looking at Victor Cruz a lot in a lot of my leagues and trying to figure out what everybody's valuing him at, because a lot of people are all of a sudden thinking he's a wide receiver 3 option instead of a 2 or a 1. I think he's a low tier 1, but he could be a wide receiver 2 as well. So I think he's someone to keep an eye on personally, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about it.
Tyler, I'll go ahead and let you take it first.
Oh,
Did we lose him?
I think we may have lost Drew there.
No, can you hear me?
We may have lost somebody there.
Oh.
I think Tyler thinks that he lost us.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, we're back.
All right.
No? All right.
All right, Tyler, why don't you go ahead and
Go
tell us?
ahead, Drew. Fire away. All right. Well, obviously, like you said, Cruz is a guy that I really like. Obviously, his value is pretty wholly dependent on how he bounces back from the knee injury. If he bounces back, hits the field, good to go, even at 80, 90% of who he was prior to the injury. He's a wide receiver 2/3 and a good one on your roster. I think OBJ actually helps his value, assuming he's healthy. Cruz is going to play in the slot. OBJ is going to draw a ton of cover. He's a strong hold for me, and like Scott said, a guy that go find the Cruz owner, see what he thinks. He may be ready to sell him for peanuts. And if that's the case, buy him up. Take a speculative run at him.
Yeah, I completely agree. My biggest concern with Cruz has nothing to do with his situation. It has everything to do with his injury. Patellar tendon tear it's one of the hardest injuries to come back from. If you look up Gene Bramall, he's the fantasy football doctor. If you got injury questions about a guy, he's the guy to go to, and he's like that's rarely do you see a guy come back from it. He comes back, I have no doubt he's still fantasy relevant if he can come back to even 75% of who he was. Because I agree that Beckham's going to draw a serious amount of coverage from him. Look at Cruz's best season was when Nix was playing at a high level across from him. So when he's not having to draw the best corner, that's when he's at his best. So I think that if Cruz can come back from the injury, then he's definitely somebody you want to have on your team. And I think we can go ahead and move on to next player discussion, which was Tyler wanted to talk about Calvin Johnson. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Tyler, let's what do you got to say?
Well, Calvin's been brought up in many, many conversations and posted in the sub this week, and his value is really kind of all over the map right now. I've seen him in the early mocks go as high as 8th overall. I've seen him fall as low as to late 2nd. Obviously he's, if I'm not mistaken, going to be 3rd early next season. All the career arc of wide receivers, very few buck that trend where they're going to, continue to really produce that high-end one level after that point. So I just kind of want to get a gauge on where he's being valued right now. What do you guys think about him? Are you buying Calvin? Are you selling Calvin? Are you holding Calvin? What are you guys doing?
Scott, I'll let you go ahead and start. Like you said, he's gonna be 30 right at the end of September, so right at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I'm not getting rid of him if I already own him, because most likely if I own him, I got him in the last 2 years, which means that I paid a good amount for him. If I'm looking at getting him this year, I'm probably looking. I'd have to say early 2nd round before I'd be willing to draft him. I'd probably end up drafting another younger wide receiver. If I had a late 1st round pick, say I had 10 or 11, I'd go ahead and pick somebody else that's a little bit younger, and then I'd try and get Calvin in the 2nd time through, and he's coming back 2-2, 2-3, wherever I was there. I'm not going to sell him if I own him, like I said. I might buy him if I have a team that feels like they're one guy away. That's somebody that you can put on your team just for a season or two, or even for the next 3 seasons, that could maybe get you that extra hump. He can't be your key piece to your whole team, but I think if you have a pretty solid team already, you need one more piece. That's somebody that isn't going to be as expensive as some of the other elite or more high-end wide receivers are going to be. Anybody that at the caliber of Calvin that's younger is going to cost you at least twice as much, I think, now. So I think Calvin's a good play as a team that maybe is like, oh, well, I have my window right now for the next 1 or 2 years. I really want to make that push to win my league. I think that's a time to maybe go grab Calvin and use his last couple years of greatness.
Yeah. I agree on the thought of, if you're going to make a run and you've got, really a 2, maybe 3 year window, that he's one of those guys he'll help carry your team there. If you're expecting anything more than that, I've probably got bad news for you. I would be concerned about his cost. I feel like if you're going to spend that much, why not go out and get an Alshon Jeffrey, who's probably going to put up similar numbers and who can sustain that success for longer. But in terms of startup, he's completely off my board. If I'm in a startup draft, I'm not drafting a 30-year-old wide receiver. To me, it's dooming your team from the start. Because that automatically puts a cap on when your team can be successful. It's almost like planning the fact that you have to go into a rebuild with your team. Granted, if I can get him as my wide receiver 3 at the end of the third, that's a different story. But that's never going to happen. I say he's completely off my board, but he's off my realistic board. At this point, I would rather.
I could see someone that had the 1.01 getting him at the 3.01. I could see that happening if he happens to slide a little bit in that second round.
Yeah, but I mean, even there, I'd rather have Cooks over him. I'd rather have.
You think Cooks would be available at the 3.01 though?
He has been in most of our mocks.
All right.
I think I'd rather have Jordan Matthews over him.
That one's tougher for me. I agree, though. I think that would be a little bit closer than Cooks for sure, but I could see Matthews over Calvin. I like Matthews going forward.
We know Tyler likes Matthews, so we don't have to ask him. But in terms of startup, what would you be doing, Tyler? Are you passing on him? Or are you taking him? Or
I'm kind of with you on the realistic price. Obviously, if he falls to me in like late second or early third, I don't see any way I'm not taking him. If anything, just for the ability to flip him, once the season gets rolling, let him post a couple of those massive Megatron games and sell him for a fortune. The mocks we're running right now, I'm finding it gets pretty sticky when you get to about the 2.07 all the way back to about the middle of the third round. You're in a funny spot where you're looking at Jordy, A-Rod, guys like that versus the Cooks, the Matthews, the Allen Robinsons. It's a really funny spot to be in. And like I said, if Calvin's sitting there, my brain just says, man, that's Calvin. Go get him. So that's kind of where I'm at on him.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to turn yourself off from that. That preconditioned response to that's Calvin Johnson. But it's almost something you have to train yourself to do. But I think we can go ahead and move on from that and move on to our college player discussion for the week. And from this point going forward, it will no longer be the college player discussion for the week. It will be the college player discussions, because I guess we're going to hit multiple players. After this week, we want to do one big name player who's probably going to go earlier in your drafts, and then we want to do a smaller name player, a guy who's not getting as much coverage. If there's a smaller school player available on Breakdown that you guys want us to cover, feel free, post it on one of the Reddit, PM it to us, post it in one of the threads for the podcast, wherever you want us to see it. And our big school guy for the week is TJ Yeldon, who's a junior running back out of Alabama. He'll be 21 at the start of the 2015 season, which is pretty young for a starting running back. And Tyler, we'll go ahead and let you kick it off. What are your thoughts?
I like Yeldon. I watched several games of his, but the one that I took the most away from was the OU game, the bowl game from 13. I just wrote down some quick notes. He's got a really good initial burst. He's really good, especially when he's coming from deep in the backfield. He hits the line rather quickly. Uh, Falls forward. I mean, that's a big thing. First downs make money in the NFL. Yeldon seems like a guy that's going to get you 3-4 yards, if it's there. Uh, he's really good if he gets in the hole. If he gets in the hole, he can get real skinny and blow right through the hole. But he also has a tendency to kind of chop his feet a little bit, not quite get up in the hole. You want to see him get on like that pulling guard's hip and get in there. And a lot of times he kind of misses that and has a tendency to bounce it outside. But at the same time, if he gets outside, he is great at the second level. He can get to 15 yards really, really fast. So I like Yeldon, still kind of on the fence. Tough to say.
Yeah, I talked about Yeldon a little bit last week, and that was before I took some time to really study Yeldon, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like you said, he gets small through the hole. He's quite strong as a running back. Very good at shedding tackles. My biggest issue with his game is his pad level. He runs straight up and down, and that kills me because if he would lower his pad level, he could push that pile probably a good 3 yards. But running straight up and down, they don't have to stand him up. He's already stood up. It's much easier for them to stop him. But I like him. He actually he moved up my board a good bit. Probably to my running back 4 in this class. And Scott, I'll let you go ahead and go on ahead.
All right. Well, I think a lot of similar things to what Tyler was saying there. I think that when he gets into the hole, he looked really good. He falls forward. He's always keeping his feet moving, which is something you really want to see in a running back. He's definitely going to get you those 2 to 3 yards. My biggest issue is I feel like he doesn't have enough. He doesn't have good enough vision sometimes for it. It looks like he wants to hit the first hole, and if that hole's not there, he's not great at reading that block to find out where he should bounce it. He tends to just decide to bounce it outside or to keep playing flat along the line, which I don't like to see that much. Has a little bit of indecision, and sometimes instead of just bouncing it and getting to the outside, he'll chop his feet and try and look for something inside, but he can't find it, and he'll end up getting tackled a yard ahead of the line of scrimmage or something like that. So that's one of my big issues. The other one was I feel like he was very weak in the blocking game. It didn't look like he ever actually came with any force when he tried to block. Looked like he just kind of put his body out there, but he wasn't coming with any force behind any of his blocks. Even when he's trying to pick up a blitz, looked like he was just kind of getting blown up. I mean, it might even be something more towards the pad level issue that you were talking about there, Drew, where it just doesn't look like he's able to get anything behind a block. It looks like he just gets smashed, and he's just standing straight up the whole time. So maybe he just needs to work on that pad level issue. I thought he looked pretty decent coming out of the backfield, though. I think I saw a couple good catches of him. He had a couple on his fingertips there, so there's definitely a lot to like. I think he's really quick. I saw some nice open field moves. It's not going to be easy to do that in the NFL. It's always open field tackling is always a big deal. So I think he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. I like him, but you got to be aware of where he's weak, and hopefully he goes to a good situation to fill those needs.
Yeah. I know what you're saying about the blocking. He didn't seem to put a lot of strength into his blocking, but his technique looked good. He seemed to, he had that punch, getting his hands in there, but he still didn't seem to be very effective in it. So I think it's a good sign. It's a good foundation that they can work with, which means he'll probably be able to get on the field earlier on passing downs, which is good because he is, like you said, very good in the passing game. Um, Dave, you have anything else you wanted to hit on before we moved on?
Who was that?
Dave, damn it! I'm so after like 13 episodes with him, it gets a little conditioned. Tyler, do you have anything else we wanted to hit on before we moved on?
Not really. I mean, as far as the blocking, he was aggressive with it. I mean, he would actively engage the defender, which tells me that he's not lazy, which is always a good foundation to have. I think a good running back coach could make him a 3-down running back. They list him, if I'm not mistaken, at 220. He looks skinnier than that to me. I think he looks like the kind of guy that could put on 8 to 10 pounds and it would do him some good, honestly.
Yeah. I think the reason he looks so small is just comparison to the other backs they've got there, especially like Chris Henry. He's actually pretty good size. But I think we've covered Yelton pretty well. And our next guy got requested by us a couple weeks ago by Umaro 900. They had 0 film of him available on Draft Breakdown, but now they've got 2 videos of him up. We did the breakdown, and so now we're bringing you Nelson Aguilar, which I'm hoping I'm saying that right.
Probably not.
He's a junior wide receiver out of USC, which has historically been a wonderful place to be a wide receiver coming from in the draft. He'll be 22 at the start of the 2015 season, and Tyler, I'll let you go ahead and take the start on this.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Aguilar a little bit this morning. You and I did. He wasn't on my radar, honestly. I mean, I'd watched some live game tape of him, and obviously we'd seen the numbers, which were amazing. The Cal game, I think he caught about 70 balls in that game, all over the place. The fact that the team's trying to find ways to feed him the ball, punt returns, they brought him into the backfield, jet sweeps, a bunch of quick screens. You know, they're trying to feed the kid the ball, which tells me that behind the scenes he's a playmaker. When I'm making my list of positives and negatives, I came up with a lot more positives than I did negatives. He's tough over the middle, really tough over the middle. Plays bigger than he actually lists at, which, if I'm not mistaken, is right at about 200 pounds, about the Antonio Brown size, 5'11", 195, somewhere in there.
Not
if I'm not mistaken. No, really.
5'10", 185.
Really?
Yeah. That's if I'm remembering correctly.
He plays bigger than that. I was pretty impressed with the kid overall, honestly. He rounded off his routes a little bit. He's a little bit choppy with his feet, but I just can't say a whole lot of negative things about him. I was pretty impressed. He's definitely on my radar now.
Yeah, I completely agree. He was not on my radar at all, and I was completely surprised with what I saw. I watched the Colorado game first, and I was immediately impressed with his initial burst and just his speed in general. He's extremely quick. He's got quick feet. And he seems, even when he doesn't have the ball coming to him, he's using that speed in every route he runs. He's going all out on every route, which shows a lot of I guess, dedication. I don't know if that's the right word, but a lot of drive, which was something that was definitely kind of a negative that we had with Marquise Lee at last year. And it helps kind of negate an issue that we have with his blocking, where he almost looks like he doesn't put any effort into his pass blocking. But that might just be because he's 185 pounds and he knows he's going to get blown up. But you can be a wide receiver in the NFL nowadays and not pass block, so it's not really a huge negative for me. He's got really good hands. He doesn't catch his body. He has no problem catching away from his body. my biggest negative on him isn't so much a negative that I saw him do, but more that out of the 2 games that are available, I didn't really see him play against press coverage. Being 185 pounds, chances are he's going to be able to be pushed around a lot. I want to see him. I want to be able to see him play against press coverage. If he can play against it, that's a huge plus for his game to me. You know, you can see him get knocked around a little bit in the open field, and he picks up right back in that same speed, so that's nice. But if it disrupts his route running from the start, then that could be a negative. Scott, anything, what else do you have to add to that?
I mean, I'm going to echo a lot of the same things you guys said. I think most times he runs really good routes. He does round some of them off. But half the time he makes some really sharp cuts. I think I saw one in the Cal game where he came out of the backfield running, I don't know, it was kind of like a slant, I guess, came out, cut really hard, ran across the middle, caught it with his hands, took a big hit. I mean, that's kind of the stuff that I'm looking for. He made a good cut, it was real sharp, made a nice catch with just his hands, and he was able to take contact and come down with the ball. He still, I believe on that play, he still even fell forward for the first down. There's definitely those things that you really like to see in a wide receiver that he has. So there's lots of really good things about him. My biggest negative, something Drew touched on a little bit, is his blocking. It seems like he just kind of takes that off. Saw a couple of plays. I mean, the run was going the other way, so, I mean, really it's usually not a big deal. Although you did see a Denver Broncos play where C.J. Anderson ran back and got tackled by somebody that one of the wide receiver wasn't blocking. Let's not talk about it. But so it's not really too big of a deal. But his blocking could use a little bit of work. But besides that, I was pleasantly surprised. Just like you guys, I wasn't expecting much. I didn't really have him on my radar at all. And he did. He looked really good on tape. He looked like he could get open. He had a lot of speed, especially coming right out of his breaks and right out of the snap. It seemed like he could blow by some guys. So it's definitely something that he could stretch the field. My one thing to your worry about him getting pressed would be I think he's going to be in the slot a good bit, at least in the early stages of his career. I think that could help him get off, but he's definitely going to have to add a little bit of weight, I think, and show that he can get physical with it as well. But I think that he can be pretty productive in the NFL, I think.
Where would you be willing to take him in without knowing a landing spot, where would you be willing to take him in the rookie draft?
That's hard for me to say because I haven't been doing a lot of rookie research quite yet. But, I mean, with talent like that, I definitely wouldn't have an issue in the 4th round. I think that depending on how deep your rookie draft is, that can be early in some drafts. I know some go 7 rounds, 9 rounds, depending on how big of a rookie class you like to have. So I think he's definitely going to be worth an add in the later rounds. I'd be more interested to see where he lands before I try and grab him, but I think that he's someone to keep an eye on. I'm definitely going to be watching him now that I've done this research on him already.
Gotcha. Tyler, how about you?
It's kind of tough to say. I mean, this class, it gets pretty jumbled up after you get through that initial tier. So let's talk about late first guys we like. Stephon Diggs, Duke Johnson, and I can't recall his name right now. The kid from Northern Iowa, the running back.
David Johnson.
David Johnson. Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Aguilar get into that late first, early second range. I really wouldn't. A lot has been made about the depth of this class, but a lot of it is just depth. I mean, it just is what it is. There's not a lot of guys that just jumping out. I mean, you're not going to get a Devontae Adams 9th overall this year. You're not going to get Allen Robinson in the 2nd round. So, could he force his way into there? Yeah, definitely. If I was holding the draft right now, is he going to be in my radar in that range? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that same spot. I was thinking, early 2nd, depending on my team, late 1st, because he's one of the few guys in this class that's actually, jumped out at me. A lot of these guys I've watched, and the thought has been, yeah, they're good, but X, but Y. This guy I've watched, and it's just, I was impressed. I got excited watching him. And I made one little note. I don't remember if y'all were watching the USC game, but it seemed like the announcers started getting bored, and they started talking about Hannah Montana and all sorts of shenanigans. And I just made a little note about that.
I wasn't listening to what the announcers were saying.
Normally I do the same because I like to pull mine up on YouTube and listen to them or watch them at halftime, half speed, so you can't listen to them, but the Aguilar ones weren't available on YouTube. So I got to listen to them talk about Hannah Montana. It was quite funny. But I guess we can move on to the submitted questions for the week. And these are fairly in-depth. So we could give in-depth answers, but I think we should try and keep it somewhat short because we've already been going for a good bit. And our first question comes from S. Woodman Roxu, and tips for a startup draft. We could do a whole show just on tips for a startup draft. So I guess, Scott, what would be your main tip? What would be, if somebody was going into their first startup draft, what would be the one thing you would tell them?
Don't be afraid to reach for your players. I think a lot of people are too worried about getting the steal every round. If you liked Antonio Brown last year and you drafted him 9th overall when people were thinking that he wasn't going to do that great, you look like a genius right now. If you have a guy high and you believe he's going to be great, draft him where you have him. Don't be afraid that because other people think he's not as good, you have to wait and you have to try and get him in the next round where he might not be there and you would get a steal on him. If you believe in it, I say draft your guy early, get who you want, be happy with who you have versus waiting, maybe missing your guy, and then having to take a second choice that you're not as happy with, and then you're going to eventually want to do more trades down the road because you're not happy with even your core or your team.
I love that advice. Absolutely. There's nothing to add to that. Draft your guys. I don't care. ADP, it only goes so far. If you look at the aggregate drafts, some of these ADPs span 2 or 3 rounds. So why not be the guy that takes them high? If you want them, get them. Tyler, what's your number one piece of advice?
Man, I like what Scott said. That kind of puts it into focus for me. That's me. Don't be afraid. Roll the dice. Another thing that I'm going to try to pay a lot more attention to, I'm only doing 2 startups this year, but I'm going to try to pay a lot more attention to having my team peak at a similar time. Try to get guys in the same age range. It's a lot better to win the league twice than to make the playoffs 6 years in a row and can't get over the hump. So
you don't want to be the Philadelphia Eagles of your fantasy football.
Right. So I'm saying, I had a ton of teams that made the playoffs last year, and I go into the playoffs, and I know I'm going to get throttled. So, what good is that? So, yeah, don't be afraid. Take risks, get your guys, make it happen.
All right, and then, yeah. I that's an interesting one, because I've actually never done it like that. And that's something I'll have to go back and look at and see, if my guys are aged to peak the same. Because I've guys like Bryant and Jeffrey, and their peaks aren't necessarily the same. Granted, they're going to produce at the same time, but Dez is at his peak now, and Jeffrey's peak probably isn't hitting until Marshall leaves. So that's an interesting thought, and it's one I'll have to sit there and think about after we do this. And I guess my tip would be don't lose your draft. Don't volunteer to lose your draft. Don't be the guy that takes Adrian Peterson in the 3rd round. Don't be the I wanted to say draft young, but that's kind of objective. But don't invest in the failing assets early in your draft, because that automatically sets you up for a rebuild from day one. If you take Calvin Johnson right now in the first round, to me that's volunteering to lose your draft. It's, it is kind of, though, draft young. Draft guys that have more than 2 or 3 years left in their career. Later in your draft, take the veterans. Those are when you can burn picks. But in the first 7, 8 rounds, those are the guys you need to hit on. Yeah. So do we have anything else we want to add for tips for a startup draft before we move on?
There's one other thing I wanted to hit on, and it's don't get caught up by the position that a guy plays. Don't find yourself there in the 4th round and go, I haven't taken a running back yet. I already have 3 wide receivers. I better get Marshawn Lynch. If another wide receiver is the highest guy on your board, take the wide out. If it's a tight end, take the tight end. Don't worry about positions. That'll all come together. Before it's all said and done, you'll be able to field the lineup. So don't worry about that. Just take your guy when they're there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the same applies the other way around. If they just stripped wide receivers off your board and Le'Veon Bell is available at the 202, I don't care if your plan was to go into the draft, go wide receiver. Take Le'Veon Bell at 202. Don't be afraid to break your plan, quote unquote, just because it was your plan. If there's value, snatch up the value. And without spending any more time on it, I think that summed it up pretty well. And the Fad asks another fairly in-depth question. How does this year's rookie wide receiver class stack up to last year's epic class? And Tyler, I'll let you take the con on this one.
Well, there are some nice players, but to even think that it's going to get close to that is pretty unrealistic. Let's look at the top of the board. You got Amari Cooper, who I think would probably slot in behind Sammy and Mike if we're talking about the actual draft positions when they drafted last year. I don't think we can. Nobody took OBJ 1 or 2 overall, so I don't think we can throw him in there. Devontae Parker's a guy that a lot of guys are high on. I'm personally not as much. Kevin White, Jalen Strong. That's about it for me as far as guys that I'm going to try to compare to, Cooks, Matthews, Robinson, Devontae Adams, those guys. At least at this point in time, I don't think it has anywhere near the depth or top-end talent.
Yeah, I agree. I think whether I agree with it or not, Parker would have been a first-round pick last year. I think that Cooper would have been a first-round pick last year, and White would have been a first-round pick last year, and that would have been it. And White might have been iffy. I personally don't think Parker's better than any of the guys that went in the first round last year. I don't think he's better than, any of the wide receivers that went in the first round last year. He's better than Sankey. He's better than Devonta Freeman. But there's just no way to compare anything to this class right now, to the 2014 class, because it's a historical anomaly. There's never been a class like it. Even these historical QB classes have never had anything like it. If you look at the 2012 draft, we got 3 legit starters and 2 iffy starters in Brandon Whedon. That's 6. How many starters do we get out of this draft in terms of wide receiver? 12? 14? Something like that? It was ridiculous.
Oh, man.
But Scott, where would you slot these guys in with this year's class?
I mean, it's hard to say. Like I said, I haven't been doing a lot of my rookie research, so I'm kind of slacking in that this week. But I'd have to agree with the idea that, I mean, it's just almost impossible to compare any wide receiver class to the one that was just last year. I think that we got really, really spoiled. I mean, no one even saw OBJ becoming what he has become already. I mean, I was high on him, but I mean, as like an early second round pick when everybody else thought he was late second round. You know, I mean, I wasn't thinking he was going to come out and just explode the way he did. So, I mean, even I think a lot of people were like me, even the people that were high on him just aren't as high, and I think aren't as high as that they were, and I think that we just got extremely spoiled. I'm not grabbing picks thinking that every year is going to be like that. If you just started Dynasty, don't go out buying a bunch of teams and thinking that anything, as long as you have 3 first-round picks, you can rebuild in 2 years. I mean, even the classes that are going to have great top-end talent, they're not all going to produce the way that this draft class even all produced in their first year. It was insane to see not only how many talented players were there, but how well all those talented players did in all their respective situations.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we had, 3 wide receivers break 1,000 yards when previously no class had more than 1. And Cooks and Robinson were both on pace to break 1,000 yards before they got injured. That's insanity. I mean, I got no words. I got nothing.
I completely agree. It's just incredible how amazing that last draft class was. It's hard to try and compare anything to that.
Yeah. And Umaro 900 had something he stacked onto this, and he says, I know you mentioned before how Aguilar didn't have any videos on Draft Breakdown. There are now two of them. This is why we did him this week. And I'm curious how you think he fits in with the wide receiver class, expanding on what the Fad said. Tyler, how would you slot in Aguilar with the 2014 class?
I think right now, I mean, the top tier is pretty clear right now. It's Cooper, it's Parker, it's Kevin White. At least as of right now, that's your top tier. I personally have Jalen Strong in there, but I know a lot of others don't.
Well, I think he means the 2014 class.
Oh, the 2014. Wow. He's definitely gonna be after the Allen Robinson, Devontae Adams group. And then after you got through those guys, we're looking at Marquise Lee, John Brown, Cody Latimer, Moncrief kind of got in that category. So I could see him going in that range, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't take him ahead of Robinson or Devontae, but I would definitely drop him right in behind those guys.
Yeah. I wouldn't take him before Moncrief or Landry, but I would take him over John Brown and Martavis Bryant and Marquise Lee and Latimer. Scott, what about you?
I'd agree. I'm right in that range. I like some of those guys more than others. I'm personally a big Martavis Bryant fan. There's just certain guys in there, I think, that depending on who you like more than the others, is where you're going to slot him in there, but I agree that he's in that second group. I like Jarvis Landry more, some guys like that, but he's definitely in that group. He's right in there. It would, obviously, after a season of him being in the NFL, it could change this to being higher in that grouping or lower in that grouping, but I think he's right in that second grouping of those wide receivers from last year's class.
Yeah. Our next question is from Dishu, I guess. What do we think of Justin Blackman? Is he worth a hold? In his specific case, his league can hold 10 players in the offseason. To me, he wouldn't be worth a holding this in his league because I don't think Justin Blackmon is a top 100 player.
I'd have to have a really, really weak other than 10 players in order for me to think that Justin Blackmon would fit in there. Just so much question marks for his future. It seems like the Jags organization wants him to keep playing there. It seems like they think he's paid his time or paid his dues, whatever you want to say. So I think that they're going to give him another shot, and I think with the talent that they're accumulating there, it's not much yet, but I think that he could still be a low end wide receiver too, even higher than that if he actually comes back and plays the way we've seen him play from time to time. But his question marks are just so big that definitely not in the top 100 for me, but would be somebody that I wouldn't mind having. I'm just not going to go out and spend a lot to get him.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Tyler, would he be top 100 for you, or what do you think?
I mean, he's probably somewhere in that range. I mean, he's worth a hold for sure. I can't imagine a scenario in which I'm holding only 10 players and he's one of the 10 that I'm keeping. Things would have to be very, very bleak. So, yeah, I'm in agreement with you guys overall on Blackmon. Yeah, he's worth a spot on a roster for sure. In a deep dynasty roster, definitely. In a keeper situation, I can't help but think you're going to have better options.
Yeah. I saw a post on the sub earlier. I think it was somebody had an offer for their a 402 for their Justin Blackmon. Would you rather keep Blackmon over the 402?
I think I would. 402, that definition of a lottery ticket. I mean, more often than not, those deep round rookie picks aren't even on your end of season roster. A lot of times they don't even make it to your week one roster. So I'd rather take Blackmon over a pick that deep, I think.
Yeah, I have the same thought, Scott.
Yep, I'm right there with you guys. I don't think that that much of a lottery is going to be worth what Justin Blackmon could be worth, although he could be worth less than what a lottery ends up being as well.
Yeah, I could easily see Blackmon pulling a Chris Carter, getting completely clean and going back and just studding it up. Because when he's on the field, he can be a wide receiver one. He's had a lot of issues. We've got one more submitted question, and that's